I shouldn't be telling you this. Not yet, at least. It's one of those things you only whisper in the dark, when the house is asleep and the wind rattles the windows like it's trying to speak. I woke up last night. No, not woke up, more like snapped awake, to a sound I can't even name. At first, I thought it was the house settling, the familiar groans and creaks that make you think you're imagining things. But this was different. Oft, deliberate footsteps, pacing slowly across the carpet outside my bedroom door. I live alone, always have. I know my home like the back of my hand. Every squeak, every draft, every shadow that stretches across the walls has a mundane explanation until it doesn't. Last night, it didn't. I froze under the covers, heart hammering, staring into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. And then I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. Like eyes were burning into the back of my skull from somewhere I couldn't see. It's funny, the things you tell yourself in moments like that. It's just a dream. You're imagining it. But the air had weight, a kind of oppressive stillness that made it impossible to breathe normally. My instincts screamed at me to leave the room, run anywhere. But my body refused. I couldn't move. And that's when I heard it. A low, almost human whisper. So faint that I can't even remember the words. Something about it felt forbidden. Like the sound itself carried knowledge no one was meant to hear. I won't lie. I've spent my life trying to rationalize things. I've laughed off urban legends, brushed aside eerie tales of the woods, of people disappearing, of shadows that shouldn't exist. But after last night, I can't anymore. I started collecting stories, true stories, things I have lived, things I have uncovered, things I shouldn't have. And the more I dig, the darker it gets. And now, for reasons I can't explain, I feel compelled to share them with you. What you're about to hear isn't just entertainment. These are experiences that claw at the edge of your understanding. Memories that linger long after the lights are off. You might regret listening, but part of you won't be able to stop. That part is already curious, already hungry for the forbidden, and I can't keep it from you. Not anymore. Before we dive in, I need to be honest with you. What you're about to hear isn't just a collection of ghost stories or campfire tales. These are 10 true paranormal encounters, each stranger, darker and more disturbing than the last. Some came from my own experiences, the ones that left me questioning reality for weeks. Others were collected from forums, Reddit threads, and old urban legends that people swore were real. And yes, some were whispered to me by people who swore I wouldn't repeat them. I've spent countless nights piecing these stories together, trying to understand why they happen, what they mean, and why they seem to escalate the longer you dig. And now, I'm sharing them with you. Because there's something almost addictive about confronting the unknown. There's a part of you right now that wants to know what happens when the ordinary breaks, when the shadows creep in just out of sight. That part of you already feels the pull, doesn't it? I want you to pay attention, to listen closely, because some of these experiences are subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss. But they build, they linger, they haunt. And as each story unfolds, you might start noticing things you didn't before. A sound in the corner of the room, a shadow moving when it shouldn't, a chill that doesn't come from the air. I'd also love to hear from you. If you've ever had an encounter that left you questioning reality, leave it in the comments. Share your theories, your suspicions, your fears. Just know, some of the things we're about to explore aren't meant to be understood. Some of them are meant to be felt. And now, the first story. It starts small, unassuming, almost normal, but trust me, it won't stay that way. Story 1. The Haunted Apartment. When I first moved into my apartment, it felt perfect. Quiet, clean, and tucked away on a street lined with trees. I remember thinking how lucky I'd gotten. The walls were freshly painted, the kitchen sparkled, and for the first week, everything was exactly as it should be. I unpacked my boxes, arranged my things, and settled into what I assumed would be a safe, ordinary life. It started subtly. At first, it was just little things. The sound of footsteps in the hallway when I knew I was alone. A faint whisper that vanished the second I strained to hear it. I blamed it on the building settling, on my imagination running wild in a new space. My friend Sarah came by one evening and laughed when I told her. "Old buildings creak," she said. "You're imagining ghosts." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then, the shadows started. Not the kind cast by furniture or passing cars. These were darker, almost liquid in their movement, slipping along the walls just out of the corner of my eye. I'd catch them for a second, blink, and they were gone. Objects began to move on their own. A chair I left in the kitchen would be in the hallway the next morning. My keys disappeared, only to reappear on the counter in a completely different room. I asked my neighbor, Mr. Jensen, if anyone else had reported strange happenings. He hesitated. "Some people say..." "The building remembers," he muttered before quickly changing the subject. The nights were the worst. I'd wake to the soft tap 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 of fingernails against my bedroom door, even though no one was there. One night, I swear I heard a voice whisper my name, so faint I could barely make it out. I froze, heart pounding, listening as it repeated once, twice, then stopped. My phone lay on the bed, face down, and I hadn't touched it. I tried to rationalize it. Old building, drafts, stress. But my instincts screamed at me that something was wrong. Something living in the corners, watching, waiting. And it wasn't just me. Other tenants gave vague, nervous glances when I passed them, quickly looking away. There was knowledge there, something unspoken, something everyone pretended not to notice. Then, one night, as I sat reading, I felt the air thicken, almost like it was holding its breath. I turned slowly and froze. In the darkness by the kitchen doorway, I saw it, just a pair of eyes, gleaming faintly, unblinking, watching. I blinked. Gone. But the sense of being observed lingered, crawling along my skin like ice. I left a note for myself on my fridge, hoping it would remind me in the morning that it was all in my head. When I woke, the note had been moved to the bedroom, neatly folded with a single word scrawled beneath my handwriting: leave. But that was just the beginning. What comes next is far worse. Story 2: The Shadow in the Woods. A few weeks after the apartment incident, I decided I needed a break from city life. I packed my tent, some supplies, and drove to a small, secluded campground nestled on the edge of a dense forest. The air was crisp, the kind that feels alive with possibility. And for a few hours, everything was peaceful. Birds sang, the fire crackled, and for the first time in days, I thought I could forget the unease of my apartment. That illusion didn't last long. As night fell, the forest transformed. Shadows stretched unnaturally between the trees, and the wind carried strange sounds. Soft whispers, rustling that didn't match the movement of the leaves. I told myself it was just wildlife, that the mind plays tricks when it's alone in the dark. But then I noticed something. Every time I turned my flashlight toward the deeper woods, I caught a fleeting shape, tall, thin, impossibly still, vanishing as soon as my eyes fully focused. I tried to shake it off and focused on my fire, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Twigs snapped behind me, not like an animal, but deliberate, slow steps. I whispered into the darkness, half jokingly, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the rustle of leaves, punctuated by something moving with intention, circling the campsite. My heart hammered, adrenaline surging as I grabbed a stick, ready for anything, though I knew it wouldn't matter. Then, just at the edge of the firelight, I saw it clearly. A shadow taller than any human, faceless, almost liquid in its movement. It paused, just long enough for me to feel its awareness, then receded into the trees. I could swear it had been studying me, calculating. I packed up my things in record time and ran toward my car, not daring to look back. Even as I drove away, I felt the presence linger, as if it had followed me beyond the tree line, waiting for the night to return. I've heard others describe similar encounters, shadowy figures that don't belong to any forest, that seem to slip into urban streets, into homes, following their victims far from where they first appeared. And that's what made me realize the terror isn't confined to the wilderness. You might feel safe walking down a quiet city street, but sometimes the shadows adapt. They wait, they watch. And speaking of urban spaces, the next story proves that even the most ordinary city blocks can harbor horrors beyond imagination. Story 3: The Old Hotel Room. A month later, I found myself traveling for work and booked a room in an old hotel downtown. The kind with creaking elevators, faded wallpaper, and a lobby chandelier that looked like it hadn't been polished in decades. The front desk clerk gave me a polite smile, but didn't offer much more. Later, I learned why. The hotel had a history. Fires, disappearances, rumors of guests who never checked out. Most people dismissed it as gossip, but I could feel it the moment I stepped into my room. At first, it was small things. A chair slightly angled differently than I'd left it. The faint reflection of someone in the mirror. But when I turned, the room was empty. I told myself it was stress or fatigue. The brain trying to make sense of dim lighting and old architecture. But then came the messages. Tiny scratches on the wallpaper, like nails tracing words I couldn't fully read. A soft whisper through the vents calling my name. I began to dread checking the mirror, knowing I might glimpse a shadow or a face that shouldn't be there. One night, I woke to the feeling of someone standing beside the bed. I couldn't see them, but the air was heavy, charged like electricity before a storm. My phone lay across the room. I hadn't touched it. A note appeared on the screen. Don't leave. I froze, staring at the words. The pulse of fear thrumming through my chest. Some of you might have stayed here. You know what I mean. That instinctive unease, that sense that the walls themselves are alive, recording everything you do. By morning, everything seemed normal. The chair was where I left it. The mirror reflected only the room, and the note had vanished. But the unease lingered. Even after I checked out, I could still feel it. Like a shadow brushing against the edges of my vision. A whisper in the quiet moments when no one else was around. It made me realize something crucial. Sometimes spirits aren't bound to a place. Sometimes they latch onto people, following them long after they think they're safe. And that realization, that some horrors travel with you, sets the stage for the next story. Not every encounter happens in an abandoned building or forest. Some find you, no matter where you are. Story 4. The Persistent Stalker. The first time I realized it wasn't tied to a place was when it followed me home. Not footsteps behind me, not a shadow on the wall, but something subtler, more invasive. It began in my dreams. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, with the image of a tall figure standing just beyond my bedroom doorway, motionless, waiting. The dreams felt too real, like memories I hadn't lived yet. Then it started appearing when I was awake. In reflections first, windows, mirrors, the dark screen of my phone. Always behind me, always just out of focus. When I turned around, there was nothing. My apartment was locked, quiet, safe, and yet I never felt alone. The messages came next. Anonymous texts with no number attached. No emojis, no punctuation. Just short sentences. I see you. You looked tired today. Did you sleep well? I tried blocking them, changing settings, even switching phones. It didn't matter. The messages always came back. When I showed a friend, he laughed nervously and said it was probably a prank. But his smile faded when another text appeared while we were sitting together. Who's with you? It learned my habits frighteningly fast. When I stayed up late, it commented. When I skipped meals, it noticed. Once, while scrolling through social media, My screen flickered, and for a split second, a face appeared where my reflection should have been, elongated, hollow-eyed, smiling too wide. I dropped the phone, hands shaking. That night, I received a voice message. No words, just breathing, slow, patient, like it was enjoying my fear. Home stopped feeling safe. Every locked door felt symbolic, not practical. I caught myself whispering apologies to empty rooms, bargaining with something I couldn't see. And the worst part? The sense that it wasn't just watching me anymore. Sometimes, when I read comments or messages from strangers, I feel it linger, like it's peering over my shoulder. Curious about who's listening, who's paying attention. If you're feeling uneasy right now, like you're being observed through the screen, don't dismiss it too quickly. That's how it works. Awareness invites attention. I never found a way to make it stop. It simply waits. And that brings me to the next story. An encounter so impossible, so precise, that no amount of logic or denial can explain what happened next. Story 5. The possessed object. When the object first entered my life, it felt harmless, almost sentimental. It was an old music box I found at a flea market, carved from dark wood and decorated with tiny, hand-painted figures. The vendor hesitated when I picked it up, muttering something about it belonging to an estate sale, about the previous owner having no family left. I laughed it off and bought it anyway, drawn to the faint melody it played when wound. It sounded lonely, like it was waiting to be heard again. For the first few days, nothing happened. The box sat on my shelf, a decorative curiosity. Then I noticed it had moved. Just an inch, maybe less. But I knew I hadn't touched it. I convinced myself it was nothing. Vibrations, gravity, imagination. That night, though, I woke to the sound of music. Soft, warped. The box was playing on its own. The tune slower than before, each note dragging like it was being pulled through water. Things escalated quickly after that. I'd find the box open when I was sure I'd closed it. The figures inside seemed different. Their faces looked sharper somehow. Their painted eyes darker, more aware. I stopped winding it, but the music played anyway. Sometimes in the middle of the day, sometimes at 3 in the morning. My sleep fractured into shallow naps, filled with anxiety and half-remembered nightmares. In those dreams, the figures moved when I wasn't looking, rearranging themselves into shapes that made my chest tighten with dread. The first violent incident happened a week later. I was standing across the room when the music box flew off the shelf, slamming into the wall hard enough to crack the wood. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there, paralyzed, watching it rock gently on the floor as if nothing had happened. Later that night, I noticed scratches on my arm. Thin, red lines like fingernails. I live alone. There was no explanation. The scratches appeared again the next night, deeper, angrier, as if something was growing impatient. Paranoia consumed me. I covered the box with cloth, locked it in a drawer, even tried sealing it in a bag. It didn't matter. I'd hear it humming through the walls, feel vibrations beneath my feet, like a heartbeat syncing with my own. Friends stopped visiting after one swore they heard whispering coming from the drawer, calling my name in a voice that sounded like mine, but wrong. Another refused to come back after claiming the figures inside the box had turned their heads to watch him leave. I researched its origins obsessively, finding fragments of stories about objects used as anchors, prisons for things that wanted to be remembered, feared, and fed by attention. Every source ended the same way, with disappearances, madness, or silence. Some items should never be touched, and yet curiosity makes fools of us all. Eventually, I snapped. I wrapped the box in layers of plastic and drove miles away, dumping it into a river just before dawn. I watched it sink, the dark water swallowing it whole. Relief washed over me, briefly. Days later, I began finding damp footprints near my bed, smelling river water where none should be. The air felt crowded, like something had returned ahead of me. Sleep became impossible, silence unbearable, darkness heavy with expectation. Even now, as I speak this aloud, that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the melody again, softer now, closer, nearby. So tell me this, if the object is truly gone, why do I still feel something watching me every time the music stops? Story 6. The Phantom Roommate. I never expected to live alone again, not so soon. My roommate, Mark, had been a quiet, dependable presence, always leaving a note if he ran out for groceries, always laughing at my terrible jokes. Then, one morning, he didn't come home. No call, no text, no warning. I assumed he was visiting family or staying late at work, but days passed. I checked his room, completely untouched. His toothbrush sat by the sink, his laptop on the desk. Everything suggested he had just vanished into thin air. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Maybe I was imagining things. But soon, subtle signs began to appear. A mug I hadn't left on the counter appeared there, his jacket draped over the chair he always used. And then the voice, soft, murmured from the living room. "Did you lock the door?" it asked one night. I froze. My phone's flashlight revealed nothing, yet I could feel someone pacing, restless. I checked his social media. Nothing new. Friends shrugged when I asked if they'd heard from him, assuming I was joking or overreacting. I started documenting everything. Diary entries, screenshots of old texts, timestamps of noises. One entry reads, "I saw him in the kitchen. He smiled at me. I asked if he was back, and he just nodded, then disappeared through the wall." Writing it down didn't make it less real. If anything, it made me question my own sanity. Sometimes, I'd hear typing in the living room, the soft click of keys. only to find the laptop closed. Once, my phone received a text from his old number. "Don't forget me." I stared at it for minutes, knowing he couldn't have sent it. And the strangest part, I began to feel a connection between his presence and my own actions, as if he was following me, learning from me, lingering just behind the edge of my awareness. It's impossible to prove. Friends and neighbors didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear the footsteps echoing late at night, or the soft voice that always seemed to know where I was. Maybe it's happening to you too. Phantom neighbors that slip in unnoticed, watching from corners you don't check. By now, I knew the pattern. The more I noticed, the stronger it became. And that leads directly into the next story, where the encounter isn't just psychological, it becomes physical and far more dangerous. Story 7. The Abandoned School. I'd always been drawn to abandoned places. The quiet, the decay, the sense of history frozen in dust and peeling paint. But the old school on the outskirts of town felt different from the moment I stepped inside. The air was cold, heavy with mildew, and something else I couldn't name. Every footstep echoed through empty hallways, bouncing off lockers whose doors hung crooked, their faded names barely legible. At first, it was just the silence, thick, almost tangible, broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaky ceiling. I wandered classrooms, running my fingers along graffiti-stained desks, imagining the laughter and chaos that had once filled these spaces. But then, I heard it. A low, guttural whisper coming from the gym. Not human, not fully, but unmistakably alive. I froze, listening. It stopped the moment I moved toward it. Rooms revealed disturbing remnants. Old textbooks, open to pages I didn't recognize. Chalkboards, smeared with frantic writing. A small broken doll lying in a hallway that seemed to shift position every time I blinked. Shadows lengthened in ways they shouldn't, slithering along the floor as if the walls themselves were alive. At one point, I swore I saw a figure crouched in the corner, watching me from beneath a torn curtain. When I blinked, it was gone, but the feeling of being observed never left. Footsteps echoed behind me, though the hall was empty. A classroom door slammed shut on its own. My heart raced, my skin crawling. But curiosity propelled me forward. I could almost sense the history trapped here. The tragedies, the disappearances. Some stories claim explorers never made it out, swallowed by the building's restless spirits. I began to wonder if those tales were warnings or invitations. By the time I left, night had fallen. The air outside felt warmer, safer, but the sense of eyes lingering on my back refused to dissipate. I realized that some spirits don't stay confined to a place. They can follow you, quietly, invisibly, waiting for moments when you least expect them. And that realization made me uneasy in a way no abandoned building ever had. Which brings us to the next story, because sometimes the entities that haunt places will choose to haunt people instead. And the consequences are far more personal and far more terrifying. Story 8. The Doppelganger. It started subtly, the way terrifying things often do. My friend Alex mentioned seeing someone who looked exactly like him. Same haircut, same crooked smile, same worn jacket, walking down the street a few blocks away. At first, we laughed it off. Coincidence, twins, mistaken identity. But then, it happened to me. I was brushing my teeth late one night when I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. Only, it wasn't me. The reflection lingered a moment too long after I turned, smiling faintly, watching. I froze, unsure if my brain was playing tricks. Then I blinked. Gone. Over the next few days, the appearances multiplied. I'd see the double in photographs I didn't take, in security footage at work, even fleetingly in passing cars. My reflection lagged behind my movements for a fraction of a second, just enough to make me doubt reality. I started checking mirrors compulsively, wondering if it was watching, learning, waiting. Sometimes I swore it mimicked me perfectly. Sometimes it smiled when I didn't. I confronted Alex about it. "It's not just you," he admitted. "I've seen mine too. And I think it's more than a copy. It wants something." Every word sent shivers down my spine. How do you fight something that knows you so intimately, that can predict your every movement? I began avoiding mirrors, covering reflective surfaces, but the dread followed me relentlessly. The line between normal life and the uncanny blurred. Friends seemed slightly off, as if echoes of them were lingering just out of focus. Strangers might glance too long, whisper too quietly, or move in ways that reminded me unsettlingly of someone I knew. And now, I can't stop thinking about you, listening. Maybe you've glanced at a mirror tonight and felt a flicker of unease, a fleeting sense that the reflection isn't quite right. That's the insidious part of a doppelganger. It doesn't just appear, it insinuates itself, planting doubt and fear, making you question every encounter, every image, every shadow. And if you're feeling that right now, consider yourself warned. The next story, story 9, is even more disturbing. Because this one isn't just about shadows or reflections. It's about a force that will stop at nothing to consume what it desires. And it's coming closer than ever. Story 9. The Midnight Entity. By the time the clock struck 12, I knew it was coming. I had heard the stories, whispers online, old forum posts, warnings passed in hushed voices. They said it only appeared at midnight, a force that thrived in darkness, patient, calculating, and utterly relentless. I thought I was careful, that I could avoid it. I was wrong. The first hour of the night was quiet, deceptively so. Every tick of the clock seemed amplified, echoing through the apartment like a drumbeat warning of an approaching storm. I sat under a blanket, lights dim, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than my imagination. But then I heard it. A subtle shift in the air, almost like static, accompanied by a faint scraping sound from the bedroom door. I held my breath. 12:15, nothing yet. Then 12:30, the whispering began. At first, I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence, deliberate, teasing, almost mocking. I dared not move, afraid that any sound might draw it closer. The shadows in the corners thickened, stretching and writhing as if alive. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, but my body refused. I was rooted to the spot, trapped by terror and fascination alike. At 12:45, it moved. A sudden chill raced across my neck as though icy fingers were grazing my skin. My eyes darted toward the darkness, catching only a flicker. A shape, tall and impossibly thin, vanishing instantly behind the furniture. My heart thundered. I whispered to myself, praying it couldn't hear me. But I could feel its awareness. The pressure of eyes that weren't eyes. Of a consciousness focused solely on me. By 12:59, I knew I had mere seconds before it struck fully. The scraping grew louder, closer, now accompanied by a low hum, like the vibration of metal strings being plucked in a frequency no one should hear. I closed my eyes, counting down silently, willing the minute to pass, willing it to leave me untouched. And when the clock struck 1, silence returned. The shadows receded, leaving the room unnaturally still. But the memory lingered, a pulse in the air that reminded me of its presence. I knew it hadn't gone. It had simply withdrawn, biding its time, learning, waiting. And now, anyone listening, anyone paying attention, could feel it too. The sense that some things are drawn to awareness itself, that curiosity alone can mark you. The next story, the final one, is unlike anything before. If you thought the shadows, the objects, or the doppelgangers were terrifying, brace yourself. Because this last tale doesn't just haunt the mind, it threatens to unravel reality itself. Story 10. The Forbidden Ritual. It started innocuously enough. A dusty, leather-bound book I found in a second-hand shop. The cover was blank except for an intricate symbol etched in gold, one I couldn't decipher. I shouldn't have bought it. I knew I shouldn't have touched it. But curiosity, that fatal curiosity, has a way of convincing you that knowledge is harmless until it's too late. The pages were filled with meticulous instructions for a ritual, the kind of thing whispered about on obscure forums, dismissed as fantasy. Symbols, incantations, precise timing. The book promised power, secrets, glimpses into realities beyond our own. I told myself I'd only read, that I would never perform it. But there's a subtle seduction in forbidden knowledge. The way it teases you, insinuates that the only thing standing between you and revelation is courage. I wasn't alone in my curiosity. A small group of friends, drawn by the same mix of skepticism and fascination, agreed to meet. We gathered in an abandoned chapel, the kind with cracked stained glass windows that filtered moonlight into fractured ominous patterns. The air smelled of mildew and burnt candles. We followed the instructions to the letter. Candles arranged, symbols traced on the floor, incantations murmured in unison. At first, nothing happened. We laughed nervously, exchanged uneasy glances, mocked ourselves for believing in ancient superstitions. Then the temperature dropped sharply, breath fogging in the cold air. Shadows stretched along the walls, moving independently, twisting as if alive. A low hum began to rise, vibrating through the floor, through our bones. The air thickened, heavy, almost viscous, pressing against our chests. The first one to scream was James. His eyes rolled back, voice distorted as if something else was speaking through him. Candles extinguished in a synchronized puff of cold wind. The chanting we'd practiced fell into discordant echoes, and then the symbols on the floor glowed faintly, an unnatural, sickly green. We tried to stop, to flee, but the air itself resisted, curling around our limbs, slowing our movements. Panic surged. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, indistinct, faceless, stretching beyond human proportions. Whispers filled the room, not words, but understanding. An ancient alien intelligence probing our minds, assessing, judging. I tried to scream, to call my friends' names, but the sounds seemed to dissolve before leaving my lips. One by one, they vanished, pulled into corners of the chapel that should have been empty, leaving nothing but echoes. I ran. I don't know how I escaped the building, how the night swallowed me and spat me back into the ordinary streets. The book. I left it behind, buried beneath the rubble of old pews. Yet I can feel it still. Even now, sometimes, I catch a whiff of candle smoke or a faint hum that vibrates just beneath perception. I think of the book, of the ritual, and I shiver. Some knowledge is contagious. Once you see it, even briefly, it never truly leaves. And that's the terrifying truth. If you're hearing this, if you followed these stories to the end, that knowledge is now with you. The forbidden exists beyond the page, beyond the screen, beyond the safe confines of imagination. It lingers, patient, waiting, observing, and perhaps one day it will call to you too. Sitting here now, I can feel the weight of everything I've shared pressing down on me, heavier than any ordinary memory should. The apartment, the woods, the hotel, the shadows that stalk, the objects that move on their own, the doppelgangers, the midnight entity, the ritual, all of it has left marks. Marks not just on my mind, but on my body, my instincts, my very sense of reality. I can't explain why I continue to feel watched, why every quiet moment makes my heart quicken, Why even the familiar corners of my home feel slightly wrong. And yet, I'm compelled to speak, to warn, to invite you into these stories. Because the truth is, the fear isn't just mine. If you've listened closely, you may feel it too. The faint brush of presence at the edge of perception, the hairs on the back of your neck that rise for no reason, the shadows that linger just a second too long. Some secrets are too dangerous to uncover. But here we are, you and I, daring to know them. Are you brave enough to continue noticing, to continue acknowledging what should perhaps be ignored? I want to hear from you. Have you experienced something unexplainable? A shadow that didn't belong? A whisper you couldn't identify? An object that seemed alive? Share it in the comments. Read other stories. The more we speak of it, the more we invite understanding. Or perhaps the more we awaken things that would rather remain unseen. There's a strange intimacy in confession, in acknowledgement. In this darkness, we're not alone. But we're also not necessarily safe. I've tried to rationalize every encounter, to assign logic where there is none. It's exhausting. Sometimes I think I'm safer ignoring what I know, pretending the entities, the forces, the lingering energies don't exist. And yet, they persist. Their traces remain in the air, in the sounds I hear, in the quiet, in the fleeting glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. Even as I speak these words to you, I can feel the residual awareness of what has been called, what has been witnessed. The unsettling truth is that the stories may not end here. For every encounter I've recounted, there are countless more, unseen and unheard, waiting. Some may be creeping closer to you even as you watch this. Perhaps they are drawn to curiosity itself, to attention, to the willingness to peer into the darkness where others turn away. That's why I urge caution. Look, listen, notice, but be prepared for what you might find. And finally, as you return to your day, your home, your ordinary life, remember this. The woods are watching, the shadows are patient, and some eyes are always following, even when you think no one is there. I can't say they will strike tonight, or tomorrow, or a year from now. But if you feel that cold brush across your skin, that unaccountable chill, that faint whisper curling through the silence, perhaps you already know what I mean. And maybe, just maybe, they've been waiting for you all along.